Hello, and welcome to the virtual Scandinavia House and to our Nordic Literature and Translation talk with Kim Simonsen and translator Randi Ward, and moderated by Heinz Nicholson. This talk is in celebration of the American-Scandinavian Foundation's annual translation competition, which awards prizes for outstanding translations of poetry, fiction, drama, and literary prose written by a 20th or 21st century Nordic author. In 2021, the Nadia Christensen Prize was awarded to Randi Ward for her translation excerpts from the Faroese of Kim Simonson's 2013 poetry collection, What Good Does It Do to a Person to Wake Up One Morning This Side of the New Millennium? This talk is being recorded and it will be made available on our website as well as our YouTube page. The website is scandinavias.org. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box. We'll get to them towards the end of the program. Randi Ward is a poet, translator, lyricist, and photographer from West Virginia. She's earned an MA in Cultural Studies from the University of the Faroe Islands and has twice won the American-Scandinavian Foundation's Nadia Christensen Prize. Her work has appeared in Asymptote, Beloit Poetry Journal, Words Without Borders, World Literature Today, and also has been featured in Folk Radio UK, NPR, and PBS NewsHour. Randi Ward's translations, writings, and photographies are used in high schools and university classrooms throughout the US and abroad. She is a recipient of the Shepherd's University Appalachian Photography Award, and Cornell University's library established the Randi Ward collection in its divisions of rare and manuscripts collection in 2015. Kim Simonsen is a Faroese writer. He completed his PhD in 2012 from the University of Roskilde in Denmark. He has authored 7 books, as well as numerous essays and academic articles. He is the founder and managing editor of Forlaget Eskil, excuse my Faroese, a Faroese press that has published over 20 titles. In 2014, Siemenson won the M.A. Jacobsen Literary Prize for his poetry collection, What Good Does It Do to a Person to Wake Up One Morning on This Side of the New Millennium? Siemenson has been a visiting lecturer at Columbia University in New York, Stanford University, and an associate professor at the University of Bergen in Norway, and is now a member of faculty at the University of Amsterdam. He also currently teaches creative writing courses at the University of the Faroe Islands and recently curated the Faroese Art and Literary Festival, Always Coming Home. Moderating today is Ivan Nicholson, who has been working with news and cultural media for several years. He's a former head of news for Faroese Television and is at the moment the CEO of Faroese National TV and radio station. He has also been a literary critic for many years and holds an MA in a degree in history, as well as an MA in globalization and integration. So please welcome everyone.
Thank you.
So if you want to take it away, Ivan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kyle, and thank you for the introduction. We are going to hear some reading of the poems from the book, which has the Faroese title Hvat, hjálpir einum menniskja, vakna, morgun, hesumegin, hetta, áratúsundið. You're probably looking forward to hearing some poems from this collection, and we are so fortunate to have the author himself reading poems from the book we are going to discuss, and Randi Ward will be reading the English translation of the poems. So without much further ado, over to you, Kim.
You're muted, Kim.
Kim is muted, I think.
Yay.
Okay.
I'm muted.
You're on now, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna start with the first poem in this book. And as you said correctly, in Faroese it's called hjálpir einum menniskja, vakna, morgun, hesumegin, hetta, áratúsundið, or in English, what good does it do for a person to wake up one morning this side of the new millennium? Hjálpir einum menniskja, vakna, morgun, hesumegin, hetta, áratúsundið. Líkami gerst öskan via nýggju punkt. Ikke endar, ikke fragræring finnst, anna enn at orskan i heilanum som ein 20 watt pera, høtte vi avskåret nýggju punkt. Menniskjatarne Jeg sa og utgitt egg, en frumskåur av brøstvorsten. Vi sender en pulse ved 1200 kilometer fer til Kina fra anledning til størrelagene. Anledning bruker røyfjørde vøtter av snertjer vi.
What good does it do for a person to wake up one morning this side of the new millennium? The body turns to ash. The ash weighs 9 pounds. No closure, no explanation to be found, except that the electrical currents of the brain are like a 10-watt light bulbs. A decapitated head weighs 9 pounds. Humankind surges on via sperm and ova, a jungle of mammali, firing off impulses at a speed of 1,200 kilometers an hour to engender sex from head to toe. The face uses 43 muscles to wince.
Telefonen ringer i heston áratúsundið noen tåsar røtten i hinn endan at de store trøyene skulle eisne fettla. Eisne vid som krøkt inn i hemsmaskinene. Vi 30 år lan og 1000 år dreimon som mange hadde gjort oss verleik. Hendan samråden bojar og knøtlån eisne.
When the phone rings in this millennium, the voice on the other end speaks of how the great trees must also fall. Even us, mangled as we are in the gears of this world, with our 30-year loans and our millennial dreams that never came true. This conversation awaits us all, others too.
Alt ber sin skugga. Ta jeg gengi til dette vattnet flyt jeg meg fram vid landslandet. Fjøran, himmelen, fuglar. Nu just, nu kjøtt hest, jøse kjem krupande. Myrskmold, kjøtt kjem kulten. Rundfrost som et hekla skjall. Kæven skal leggjas om alt. Som et kutkinn. Og lukka som ta ustøyerlands leie, kroste, hjørna, seg.
Everything bears its shadow. When I walk to this water, I move along with the landscape, the shore, the sky, the birds. Autumn is on its way. The light comes crawling. Dark soil. Soon it will turn cold, rime like a crocheted shawl. A hide of snow will cloak everything in a heavy white reminiscent of the Ice Age glaciers that once sculpted the earth.
Og vi sjøvnen gråa himmelen og altene fer meg hos badnarene, så enda i sommer havet og låter rista minne av seg. Vi så ikke helst ikke andre sommer sammen, 4 brunner reparasniklar i etta jólest, 2 nekk minne svarta sniklar i græsno, græs i brunt, et landslag og stidlar tøyning. Senast i slette funnsalt og reparasniklar i Orsdagernset her ur en reien pakka vi kvitum bøkstavna, ringte oss sammen og sprongt oss med en grønner innvøder sprukte fram.
Something about the sea, the gray sky and the waves makes me think about my childhood. Summer drew to an end. The sea and mild breeze shake off the memories. We probably won't have another summer together. In the brown grass, 4 brown killer slugs silently devour 2 smaller black slugs. A landscape of silent mayhem. The last time I sprinkled salt from a red box with white lettering on the killer slugs in your garden, they shriveled up, writhing until their green guts burst open and oozed out.
Skal vi byggva her en av tøy, vi en gulden hus vi nekkon små rum, vi øyne for å være badnøy for drøntjer. Norske kongren Håkon vidtja i 1906, til ringerist mye langer. Føtter einar i åtsjar unger der skjekve, vi føler meg heima einar i åts, bæra einar i åts. Vi der og kvørs einar i åts, jeg sakna til årstidsjat, hoksom, løyvi utan det. Nå kallt, jeg svimja, jeg sjøm.
I'm going to live here for a time in a yellow house that has many tiny rooms. It used to be an orphanage for boys. King Håkon of Norway paid a visit in 1907. You don't call me anymore. I was born on an island. Islands are surrounded by water. I feel at home on an island, only on an island. But now we're on separate islands. I miss you and can't stand the thought of a life without you. The sea is cold for swimming now.
I gjør fikk jeg februar lukka som februari ikke kom, og nå sommer kvarv. Alt og kjøtt. Og morgen lå tro brun blå av gulven om en halsan, og så kammers gulven om fra Birketøven utanfor det. Jeg vil til halsen om vi tar oss ikke sammen langer. Greinene trøven om flytta seg ekvislig i vinden om, vi bygger ensam allerede. Kalenderen sier at dæveren stitt ved 3 timer og 30 minutter. Angen ringte I det.
I came down with a fever yesterday. It felt like a spring that never was, and now summer's gone way too fast. There were 3 brown leaves on the floor this morning, a greeting on my bedroom floor from the birch trees outside. I have a sore throat. We don't talk anymore. The tree branches thrash about in the wind. I live alone here. The calendar says the day is growing shorter by 3 hours and 50 minutes. Nobody called today.
Det regnar ostagaren I vater og kalter. Det torsdag 3 september I har vi helst av virus. Jeg går ikke fram I vatten til jeg hoksan det svimja nu. Hoksa om en deia terran og alt løyve som spoirer det han døyr. Det millioner viruspartiklar I en milliliter sjekve. Låt vi alla partiklarna rea, sträckte oss 200 miljoner ljusår ut ur rumtna. Alla tyne mest virus, sløy mot väska eller gift. Sjekvren är en sløy mot väska, vit sløy mot väska. Själv vätan in I tyn egen som jag älskar så nägg, gjort av fiskallyse. Okkar høylig født og lyse. Vi flyttar sløy mot av väsk I mitten okkar tankar svimje I lyse, født og sløyme. Og hesumegin áratúsundið skal sløyme streima mittan alder.
It's raining. The garden is cold and wet. It's Tuesday, September 3rd. I probably have a virus. I walk along the water's edge. Swimming is out of the question now. I think about the dead seaweed and all the life that springs from its decay. There are millions of virions in a milliliter of seawater. If we lined all of the virus particles up end to end, they'd stretch 200 million light years out into space. In Latin, the word virus means slimy liquid or poison. Seawater is also a viscous liquid, and we are mostly viscous liquid. Even your eyes that I love so much owe their glisten to fish oil. Our brains are fat and oil. Our thoughts swim in lipids and mucus. Back and forth between us, our bodily fluids mingle. In this new millennium, cytoplasm is going to surge through the ages.
Walter Reed fann virus I menniskjan 1908. Virus ikke livande. Virus kompleks, livrunden materia, lika som virus vitkompleks. Men vit livande. Virus onka orsko, det kunne ikke endurskapa seg sjálvan. Det kunne bare gjørs tjøkken kikner, så løsner seg, lykkes vi møyre av virus enn sniklene. Partvis av virus nu, mot virus lunsjet etter en verste, omkring som jeg kan smitta. Virus har sett seg I ørene, alt jeg var som det ball at la nåtten til grannene. Her bastret man for alt å darra, I færre sjånkatter og drømme om, og istøyna håna I øyne for den vær. Jeg skal skifte hem, det mørkt nu, Karlagen dødjande.
In 1901, Walter Reed discovered the first species of virus known to infect humans. Viruses are not living organisms. They are complex organic structures. Humans are also complex, but we are living life forms. Viruses don't have their own metabolism, and they can only replicate inside the cells of a host organism. In this sense, we are more like viruses than slugs. I'm part virus now. My virus longs for a host, someone I can infect. It has spread to my ears. It sounds like there's an all-night party upstairs and the pounding bass makes everything vibrate. I go back to bed and dream of the bitter cold arm of an ice age glacier. It's time to slip this skin. It has gotten dark. Love is dying.
Läraren Gette säger att jorden var skapt för 4,6 miljarder år så gärna. 800 millioner år siden var livet som sjøen for 600 millioner år siden la hentan åkken sånn for Hvat. Her spår etter høggetløtje som levde her for 430 millioner år siden. Jeg vet ikke om vid sett og spår i høver.
My teacher, Mr. Pike, said that the Earth was created over 4.6 billion years ago. There was life in this sea 800 million years later. This island was located south of the equator 600 million years ago. Here are traces left by a squid that lived 450 million years ago. I don't know if we've left any traces at all.
Jeg var i London for det Natural History Museum og spurte om jeg kunne slippe suttja saunia klokken. Gjøre hvor vi livande vera gjør her klokka, en kjenner vi bare 330.000 av de 3 millioner som til. Hentan tøyen her bløyene blir råtna, her trøyene brunkast innanfra er tøyen til klokken. Tøyen her alt endar. Vi sitter ensam aldri en træst og bare merske, alt søkker seg inn i meg. Og sorglist mellom løyene, og skåne og ringene sammen.
The first time I was in London, I went to the Natural History Museum and asked if they would let me see their collection of beetles. 1 out of every 4 living beings on Earth is a beetle. We've only identified 350,000 of the 3 million beetles that exist. This time of year, when the leaves begin to decompose and the trees turn tawny from the inside out, is the season of beetles, the time when everything comes to an end. I sit alone on a tree stump and feel it all sinking in. I double over, go to pieces among the leaves in the forest.
Jeg nødder jeg en tur fra nu natten kjemur, vindren og regnet fjellast. En den bøye minner meg om, da jeg et halvt år drakk med fotlarna boiling pappvinn hver skåld av hjertastorg. Og meldte i årene, jeg satt opp i nattena og spalte stedland tonelike og skriva i. Jeg må fære inn at nu, mye bilene skrutsk min øyren om alt som ikke hår minnast.
I have to take another walk. Now that night's falling, the wind and rain mask everything. This time of my life reminds me of the 6 months I spent heartbroken on drunk on boxed wine every night. Reminds me of all the years I sat up late playing soft music and writing. I need to head back inside now. The mosquitoes are whining in my ears about everything I don't want to remember.
Og strandene finner jeg en fuglaskalt. Vi finner omkant i beinagrunnen av folk. Ekna hålnar er svartar. Vi har släppt dem degen i hål i hjørnet utanfor kyrkene. Det gjemmer syrkna. I Paris har jeg en av den stakkare av skulptum. Jeg kjenner ikke fuglarna her. Da John James Audubon var 40 år gammal avgjørte han å male alle fuglarna i Amerika. Vi vattlidsmynton. Fra 1820 til 1880 kom bogen Birds of America spekla undan gave. Han maler jo 600 fuglar som han skjeit og drep. Fuglarna låt i fjær til skrutja av byen.
I find a bird's skull on the beach. We never find the skeletons of people. The eye sockets are black. We just dump our dead into holes in the ground outside churches. It's depressing. In Paris, I once saw stacks of skulls. I don't know the names of the birds here. When John James Audubon was 34 years old, he decided he was going to paint watercolor portraits of every bird in America. His Birds of America was published as a set of volumes that appeared between 1827 and 1838. Audubon painted over 700 birds that he had shot and killed. The birds here don't sing. They cry out in pain.
Jeg gjenner fram i brons Nicholson som etter konanna slittelslea, fram i sjøvnen, framkattle tøyer. I 1636 tekna I Sveisaren Albrecht van Haller og det avskår mannahøtt. Og I Hallers fysiologi kom og vøttarrørsler ikke av mekanisk årsøkken, men av omkron som virka I hine med en tilvid. Tøy kom du out høgt høtt blinka vi egnom. Og deitje og spjolka vi ørmen og bøynen. Hega det fire at samme og enda døden kan ikke fætast. At allheimren en elementarpartikkel i en større allheim. Tú min alheimur. Gleymi að vera som degi fuglurin. Rúmur min evarska lukla leiklut í öllum. Her og bløyene, sjekkburen. Hetta landslegi framkalla meg. Ég lærer meg að búja.
I happen across brown snails silently devouring each other, close to the seashore. Epochs evoked like developing photos. The Swiss biologist Albrecht von Haller sketched the decapitated head of a man in 1756. In Haller's encyclopedic physiology, muscle movement was not the result of mechanics alone. It was caused by something at work beyond consciousness. This is how decapitated heads could blink their eyes and dead animals thrash about. Georg Hegel maintained that true infinity could not be comprehended, that the universe is an elementary particle of a much larger universe. You are my universe. I can't wait to be like that dead bird. I embrace my insignificant role in everything, the leaves, the sea. This landscape is developing me. I learn to wait.
Kanskje en mynd og sier farvel i sommer, jeg heter Are, hals kaldt kvirlån er løyt igjen i heste og kommande vetren. Golden minnest, alt spår, lika med minnest.
I take a picture and say goodbye to summer, to this year. I give my regards to the cold gusts. I look to the fall and coming winter. The cold remembers every step. The body recollects.
Min svarta Android-telefon sier at hun endast er 11% etter batterien, og et år færre, der hun stitter vi 3,238 minutter. Jeg husker om det med han til først. Mannen i Roma fyrir meg, hjørner under, bløyene flyta seg kvalt. Vinteren i åleis, regnet høyres, ikke at høyme under flæ. Som en rei flytefugler som glemte å flyta, nå alt for svøtt. Ungen vet at det færren.
My black Android telephone says it only has 11% battery remaining. A year has passed. The day has grown shorter by 3 hours and 58 minutes. I think of you as you are leaving. The moon above, the earth below. This evening the leaves rustle, the wind is silent. The sound of rain never reaches people in their graves. I'm like a red bird that forgot to migrate. Now it's too late. No one knows I'm gone.
Well, thank you, Kim and Randi, for that beautiful reading and of the poems. Next, for the next 15 minutes or so, we are going to dwell on some of the themes and motives in your writing, Kim, and also on the translation. My first question is for you, Kim. What informed your composition of this collection, and how did you go about structuring it?
Yeah. In many ways, I probably don't use metaphors in the same way as my predecessors have done. But let me just go back to base. It actually makes me happy to have this talk and to be kind of back in New York, because I also want to thank the American-Scandinavian Foundation for this award that was awarded to Randi. And when I go back to your question, in my recent poems and books, I think I'm kind of writing in layers. I'm like juxtaposing a way of writing from something maybe peaceful or understated. Often I'm combining sort of an ultra close, a close up, you might say, in the language of films and television. And I have a sort of a cut up style when I focus on landscapes, microbes, geology. I also, sprinkle a lot of autobiographical explorations and elements into this poetics. So I'm also inspired by an interest in science, cosmology, and the relations to things, to matter, to materialism. So a poem of mine can be a sort of a geopoetry, or a combination of geography and poetry that I'm like investigating an area or a piece of land. So I'm looking at the micromateriality of a square meter of animal life in the frozen lawn, or a small part of a beach after a storm in the North Atlantic. I might look into slugs and worms and overlooked or sort of precarious life forms. But still, there is a voice in the poems at the same time, which is also hopefully exploring a sort of a meditative experience of revisiting the relations between the I in the poems and landscapes in different times and places that this I has been moving through, living in, or maybe don't live in anymore, or maybe is living in one more time. I think that affects a lot of the way I manage to compose sort of a collection.
If you're looking at a larger context, so to speak, and look at other poets as well outside of Faroe Islands, what do you think this collection contributes to Nordic literature or even world literature?
As I was beginning to say before, I guess, and taking into account the Nordic literature, that maybe there is a shift from the more metaphorical poetry that we are used to into a sort of another way of writing, that a bacteria maybe, or a virus, or a slug, or something from science can be put instead of the metaphor. So that's a huge difference, I think. Sometimes I feel that these homegrown metaphors can be kind of derivative, or maybe even sort of tacky. When thinking about form, I think my poetics are like a rope. If you can imagine a rope maker making a rope out of smaller parts. I mean, you have like 3 parts in a rope. So one part of this rope might be facts like science or natural history or cosmology. Another part could be derived from poetry, obviously, but also sort of a poetry that is highly inspired by prose. And the rest is also stems from a poetry that is more semi or autobiographical. So if you combine these layers in the text, that you will get a more experimental form, and you also get a more hybrid poetic text. The notion of the hybrid comes from biology, meaning to mix 2 or more species. Like flowers, you can cross-pollinate flowers, so you make a hybrid. So both in biological philosophy and in biosemiotics, we learn that also that everything communicates. A snail on the road means something. The colors on the back of a frog or a yellow bug means something also. So the hybrid text in my case is not only, as some other do, they might combine different genres, like have prose and then have lyricism and images combined in one book. For me, it's more on the actual textual level. So the text is actually more hybrid in itself.
I'm wondering, are these could you say that your work since 2013, when you wrote this book, has been? Have you at this point further explored or pursued the modes of composition in your work?
I think what I have pursued is actually an interest in things, an interest in the human condition, and also I'm trying to explore again and again something to do with which I also feel is coming up a lot in Nordic and Scandinavian literature. It's very consumed by, on one hand, the natural crisis with species dying and mass extinctions and so on. Because this has also led to sort of a spiritual crisis, and this crisis is also rooted in a very old blind belief in rationalities way back to Plato and Aristotle and so on, that we have lost sight of how we are connected to everything, how our intimate connections with the world, with the common slug and so on, that we are overlooking the deeper significance of both when it comes to the scientific and the existential experience of being alive, of being, a living part of everything living, that we are a part of this fine mesh network of life. Also, it's obvious to say that the Earth has entered a new geological era, the Anthropocene, and man, being the dominant life form on the planet Earth, has created a challenge to the world. And that, I don't know how much this inspires me actually in my poetics, but maybe it is there somehow. But also there's, I guess, when it comes to things that I've written after this book, there's something that also some critics have mentioned, that they've called it a flat ontology, that every life form is just there. The human, the slugs, there is another sense of geological past and cosmology altogether, because there is a different way of, I hope, different way of looking at it.
One more question for you, Kim, before I go to Randi, and then I'll come back to you in the end. I was wondering, since the two of us both come from remote Faroe Islands, I know that you've studied and done much of your work outside of the Faroe Islands. In fact, you lived more than half your life outside of the Faroe Islands. But how has studying and living abroad impacted your perspective and style, do you think?
It's a wonderful question, because I'm also wondering a lot about that myself. A lot of the time, I would say that the area, like if I write something from a beach, for me it will often be from the Faroe Islands. But my the people I'm inspired by, the people that I follow, are a lot American and English. Academians and poets and writers. Recently, I experienced the poet May Bessenbrugge. I think that's the way you pronounce her name, Bessenbrugge. She read at St. Mark's Church in New York, and she also has this long line poems combining very abstract elements and statements. And in Denmark, we have another person that looked, her poems also looked a bit like hers. She was called Nadia Christensen. Now she's dead, but she's a gigantic poet also. And to me, both Christensen and Bessenbrugge are huge inspirations. Also, the American poet J.L. Mcsweeney, both as a poet and her books on literature, has been inspiration for me. She has coined the notion of the Negro pastoral, the death pastoral, which is very sort of in tune with our time with mass extinction and so on. Also, I am inspired by a lot of these new philosophers. Actually, many of them are female, like Jane Bennett. She talks in her famous book, Vibrant Matter, that there is also this vitality in matter, and that's also, the point of this notion of a more living materiality. Materiality isn't all dead. So my next book is actually on death and in general, but it's also very much about it's also about the death of my father, but it's also about the relation, man's relation to the world, and that how materiality is neither passive or natural or something we just move around as we want, but it's also an active force with its own significance. So things and materiality, they operate also beyond our comprehension.
Thank you, Kim. I'll come back to you in a moment. But as we all know, the challenges of translating imagery and motives in poems into a different language can be immense. And Randi, you have done a tremendous job. I was wondering, Randi, what were some of the specific challenges you faced while translating this collection?
Well, it really irritated me to start with. I would start and I was like, what is he doing? I just don't like this. What is this? What's going on here? And of course, the layout, we haven't really gotten into that, but the layout of the book is really interesting and unique. And of course, it's divided up into 4 sections. And all the sections are a little different, but also it's very disruptive in where the texts appear on the page, sort of big black pages between the poems and in sections. It's hard to do it justice. You have to see it, hopefully, one day. It was definitely the pacing, the structure, the immediacy, and the juxtapositions between and within the poems. And that was just very uncomfortable for me because to translate it, I sort of have to, well, we're in this relationship, the work and myself. I mean, I'm sort of, it's in me, embodying it. I'm sort of trying to physically, I feel like I'm wrestling with it. I guess first I had to figure out, why is he doing what he's doing, so I can even proceed to deal with this. What I guess I first perceived as interjections and a kind of clinical exposition made me wonder and ask why it was so off-putting to me, which actually led to me considering the paradigms we live our lives in and how we ground our abstractions and forget their constructs. So it really made me think about, the book is a lot about grief, loss, love, home. There's a spatiotemporal element to it. The consciousness of the narrating subject, if you want to call it a subject, is in different places all the time. And that's what was very jarring to me. So sort of learning how to read that and appreciate it so that I could even translate it was my first, I would say, major hurdle. And then I guess I was seeing he was synthesizing what we perceive as the intensely personal with what we perceive as detached or indifferent, and then inverted it. And that's.
Do you actually think that translating this collection taught you something, or?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think because when I write myself, I often write in very compact, small poems. That's not to say there isn't a lot going on in them and there's not a narrative flow to them, but this is a different way of approaching a narrative flow in poetry, the poetics, and the collection as a whole that I haven't worked with before. So I really struggled to keep from disrupting the flow of the lines and the narrative voice as I was trying to keep the not Christmas, crispness of the imagery and the impact of the transitions, because a lot of it hinges on these sort of, like I keep using the word jarring, but these juxtapositions, things next to each other and following from each other that you just really catch you off guard. So I was trying to do justice to that without it getting lost in the words, because there is a real momentum to everything. And I was trying to keep Kim's momentum and pacing, but without losing how everything was flowing from each other, the images, the statements, all those things. That was difficult for me. Also doing justice to the immediacy of the poems and the emotional spectrum of it, because within the same poem, you can go from being like almost manically happy to sort of dejected and self-effacing. You know, there's just all these different, and one poem I remember, well, there's several, but it goes from sort of melancholy to manic, resigned to self-assured to anxious to grief-stricken, droll to hopeful and content. There's this movement all the time that's difficult to do justice to. And it also taught me a lot about the power of intertextuality to structure a collection, you know, how drawing in all these different texts. And I think the reason I found the dynamic so jarring was because I hadn't grasped how the dissolution of an intimate relationship and a sense of self caused the narrator to search for new ways to connect and to find consolation as part of the larger systems we're inextricably bound to and made of. So the more clinical the text seemed to become, the more I began registering that as a way of coping with constant loss, and that somehow made it more intimate to me. So I could almost see that in the way it was, I don't know, there's just all these ways we talk to ourselves and then try to, like Kim says, bounce back into the rational, enlightened being when we're just like puddles of slime on the floor crying. You know, it's like, you know, going from one extreme to the other. And I think another thing that working with the collection, the poems taught me was, as I was trying to best serve the structure and the overarching themes, I learned a lot about how I could use punctuation to further emphasize connections between images and certain lines. So in this collection, Kim doesn't use a lot of varying punctuation, but sometimes I would try to use semicolons or colons, and sometimes even an em dash, as a way to emphasize the interconnectedness of the lines. And as the collection progresses, I try to do that more, to also in the text emphasize that you're finding a new kind of interconnectedness in a way that at first would seem like you're minimizing yourself or becoming nothing, which causes a sort of crisis. You know, when you think of yourself among the viruses, or you think of yourself, you know, composed of all these processes and all these things going on within you all the time that you're not really conscious of, that seems a threat to us, but it really shouldn't. So I was just trying to emphasize the interconnectedness.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear you describe the challenges of translating this text. One final question to you, because we're running a bit short of time now. How do you know when a translation is actually finished?
It's never done. Yeah, I mean, literally, I was. That's the thing. You know, I've literally been looking at parts of this collection since 2015, I believe.
Yeah.
When Kim and I first started, 2014, I think, into 2015. And every time I look at it, and every time I come back to it, there's always something different. There's always something I didn't see. There's always a connection I didn't make. And I mean, at some point, I guess you have to let it go. But literally, even as I was coming to do this reading, I was making little scribbles on the poems, finding little things that I thought could be different or better or more precise. So I don't feel like I'm ever done, honestly. And that's why someone just has to pry it out of my hands, kick it down the stairs, take it, because I won't let it go.
It's very interesting to hear from you. It's quite a challenge being a translator, but I think you did a wonderful job. So thank you very much for that.
Scandinavian Foundation.
Yeah. One final question, going back to you, Kim. Of course, not many Faroese poetry collections have been translated into English, English being probably the most important language. What significance does this have for you?
Well, I think a German theoretic who was theorizing about, I think it was called Hetta, he talked about the connection between translation and salvation. So that once something is translated, it might be put into another context, and of course there is this motive also, or this concrete thing that once you're if you get translated into a major language, a lot of more things will happen with your writing. And we also saw that happen with we were in an anthology, Randi's translations of my poems, who I can't really remember this.
The Edge of Extinction.
Edge of Extinction, exactly. And that that anthology went completely viral all over the world. So that I think that book has gotten the most mentions that I've ever been a part of, from Japanese to whatever, and it still comes out in large quanta, this book, in new editions, and it was the English poetry librarian from London who actually put this book beautifully together. That was just an example of the meaning of being translated. And this book was also trying to put forward this theme of the dying of languages. So that was very relevant for us, coming from very small languages. It's always a battle to become translated more and more. And I think that there is a certain feeling now beyond among writers that it's equally important to be translated as it is to write, almost. So we are also seeing that funds are being litigated into this area in the cultural policy of the Faroe Islands. And this is a really good notion, because 20 years ago, or maybe before that, it was like there was less emphasis on translation, I think, which was a very false policy, if you ask me.
Yeah, that's right. It's good that it has changed, definitely. Well, thank you for that answer. I think we are running out of time here. Thank you very much, Kim and Randi, for this discussion. Kyle, I don't know if you can take it from here, if there are any questions for Kim and Randi from the audience.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. There doesn't seem to be any questions. So yeah, so I think this is a perfect time to conclude this wonderful discussion. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Next week, we will be discussing The Land of Short Sentences, which is the other translation prize winner from the ASF in 2021 by Hunter Simpson. Or Hunter Simpson was the translator, as Zina Pilgaard is the author, and that will be next Saturday at 1 p.m. So I hope you can come back to that. We also are starting to do programs at Scandinavia House again after Omicron. So we have a lot of interesting things coming up. But I want to thank everyone again. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Randi, for your wonderful work. Thank you, Ivan, for moderating. And thank you, everyone, for coming. And I hope to see everyone again soon. Okay, thank you.